Seattle is starving for effective leadership, a mayor who makes no excuses and acts with urgency. I will unite our communities around our progressive values to make real progress on the challenges we face.
Well, folks, you are listening to your new mayor, Bruce Harrell, one of many moderate candidates who successfully pushed back against more progressive opponents in this November election. The marathon of the fall election is over. We're going to talk about that, an upcoming public hearing on the budget for the city council, and a whole lot more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And we're going to be talking about a ton this week. And to do that, I always bring in the champ. Kevin Schofield is with us yet again. And Kevin, I always feel so exhausted after an election day happens. Should I do a cup of tea? Should I jump on some Monster energy drink, or should I just have a double scotch and take a nap? What do you think?
A nap sounds good. That and a long walk.
Does,
I find going outside
and
a long walk. It was kind of blustery yesterday afternoon, but I did that yesterday and it's kind of cleared my head.
You got to clear the head for sure.
Find a little kind of zen and balance with it all.
You got to try. That's thank you, sir, for that good advice. Get out and enjoy it, folks, in between the torrential downpours out there. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They are open for business at their City Hall location, so make sure you check them out. Support them, support other small businesses too. Thanks to owners John and Riley for your support as always. Thanks also to our patrons. We're hoping more of you can jump in at the $10 level, because if you do, you're going to get one of these. A very special Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug. Look at Kevin. He's also a hand model in his off time. That's good to see that, Kevin. If you jump in at that $10 level, we'll send you a Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug. Jump in on Patreon if you can. And we can also feature your mug on our mug shot of the week. A special mug shot this week of Olivia. She's the daughter of some friends of our family, Kevin. She's hoping she can go to the University of Washington, and she's talking about a political science major. I really tried to steer her differently. Like, politics are crazy. Stay away. But kids today, they just won't listen. Run
away while you still can.
I know. Well, good luck, Olivia. And thanks to all of our patrons out there. Please send in a mugshot if you have one of our mugs. And if you don't, join us on Patreon, pledge at the $10 level, and we will send you a mug that you can take a photo of. How about that? Thanks to Converge Media 2, the video version of our podcast is featured on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get this party started with right here, right now. All right, so Kevin, we are recording this podcast as election results are showing most of the progressive candidates, aside from Teresa Mosqueda for City Council Position 8, lost out to more moderate opponents. Just big picture here, what did that say to you?
Well, I've been spending a lot of time diving in the numbers because, that's what I do.
That's what you do.
And what it looks to me, we still got a lot more analysis to get in, looking at precinct details, find out like who showed up and who didn't show up. But it sure looks like we saw over the last few months a strategy of the progressive candidates really playing to their base, with messages that play to their base, with canvassing and flyers and everything that really targeted getting out their base. And it looks like they got out their base. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much all the support that they got.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So, and I think the big lesson for them, if they're paying attention, is that the progressive base alone is not enough to win an election in this city.
Right. Yeah.
You have to have a message, and you have to have results that are broader than that.
Right.
And in this particular
we've seen
election,
it play out across the country too, in terms of different progressive candidates. Keep going.
And the Democrats as a whole, right?
Yep.
That they've dithered for a very, very long time on the infrastructure bill and the other bills that they've been working on, and they've got they had nothing to show for for the last 6 months for this November election,
right?
And that hurt the Democrats nationwide. Pretty badly on this. But the local version of this is that homelessness is up and more visible.
Yep.
Property crime is up. Gun violence is up.
Yep.
People don't feel safe going to parks. People don't feel safe, on the streets downtown. Mm-hmm. And taxes are up, right? Taxes got raised. Right. There's a big new payroll taxes here.
That's right.
And so why would people vote for the people that did all that? I think a lot of people outside, again, the progressive base showed up.
Yeah,
but they didn't expand the progressive base,
Yeah.
and they didn't deliver a message that was attractive to anybody else. And it sure looks from the numbers like the progressive base was all they got.
Yeah. In looking at that, I just looking at Mayor-elect Harrell and what's going to be going on with him, coming through on campaign promises, he was talking a lot about keeping public spaces clear, keeping parks clear. Is he going to be able to deliver on that? Because I think that's the big one that a lot of people are waiting on.
Yeah, so I don't think there are a lot of questions about what Mayor-elect Harrell is going to do. I think in a lot of ways he's going to look like what Mayor Durkin looked like.
Yeah.
The big question is what happens with the city council.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, and this isn't going to be a huge change for the city council. I mean, we'll see what happens with the Sawant recall election.
Right.
That could be a much more significant change. But there were only 2 positions up, and and it's certainly not going to move farther to the left.
Yeah,
it looks like Muscat is going to get reelected, and it looks like Sarah Nelson, will be one more moderate. So it'll be 6 progressives and 3 moderates instead of 7 and 2. So a slight shift. But the bigger question is, what do the other city council members, particularly the 7 district-based ones who are going to be up for election 2 years, take away from this election? Do they realize, we've been living in an echo chamber and only talking progressive base, and that's not going to get us reelected.
No.
Or are they going to double down on what they're doing? I've certainly heard some folks, in the political punditry class and, in political Twitter for Seattle and all this say, this just proves we need to organize better. It's like, not really sure that was the message for this, right?
I'm not sure.
There's going to be a lot of navel gazing in the next few weeks. So again, what message the city council members take away from this is going to be very important, right?
Yeah.
If they say, okay, we heard a message loud and clear about homeless encampments in parks and about street safety and about the police and the notion of defunding or even just downsizing the police, that the majority of the citizens are not on board with that, which is certainly what it seems to be the case.
Right.
Maybe they'll adjust their policy stance on this. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be hard to say. I imagine the city council members are thinking very hard about that question right now.
And the transition to the Regional Homelessness Authority that's happening at the start of the year. There's a lot of different pieces, certainly with the homeless bit. But let me take one more stab at something you talked about earlier with regard to the Shama-Sawant recall election, which is happening in District 3 on the 7th of December. And I actually did talk with the Shama Solidarity Campaign recently about this. They're definitely concerned about this Seattle-wide and nationwide push against progressive candidates. I wonder about that. Do you think this political momentum from these citywide races will have an impact on that vote in District 3?
Well, so let's just start by stating the obvious here. District 3 is a lot smaller, and generally it's a lot. it is diverse in a lot of ways. But there is a very concentrated progressive base in that city, right? So if they turn out the progressive base there, it's more meaningful than the city as a whole, right? So, within that context, I look at this and say, did what just happened this week energize the progressive base to sort of
get
turn out more, to try to defend, their most progressive candidate on the council right now?
Right.
Or is it going to energize the moderates to, on their hand, double down on what just happened and say, hey, we can get kind of a clean sweep on this and get Sawanta, or both? Is it going to energize both? And are we going to see just a really heated pitched battle over the next month over this?
Yeah. I'm very interested to see what happens there. I wanted to make sure we touched on the city attorney's job. I know as we are recording this that Nicole Thomas Kennedy has not conceded the race, but it sure looks like Ann Davison is moving ahead. This one is so interesting to me because I know Thomas Kennedy pointed out on the campaign trail, Davison, for all of her talk about law and order, has not been an attorney in a criminal court. So there's some concerns there. I just wonder about Ann Davison being in this role, what that's going to do, potentially some pushback within city government. What's that going to look like?
Well, let's just be clear about what happens in the city attorney's office.
Yeah.
They have a criminal division which handles misdemeanors in Seattle Municipal Court.
Right.
They have a civil division who, defends the city against all sorts of civil lawsuits.
Yep. And that's about 2/3 of their business, right?
They have a big just sort of paperwork division that gives legal advice to the mayor's office, to the city council, to individual city departments on, reviews and provides support for legislation that the city council is writing and that the mayor's is writing for that matter. So there's a lot more that the city attorney's office does besides just prosecute misdemeanor cases in Seattle Municipal Court. And so, there are almost no candidates that come into that office who have experience across all of those.
That's fair. Okay. I got you. Okay.
So there's that part of this too. You certainly raise a good point that a big part of what city attorney does is decide policy around things like diversion programs.
Sure.
And, what crimes to prosecute.
Exactly.
And how aggressively to do that. And so there's some policy decisions that she's going to be making. But Davison is not the one who's going to be showing up in court for most of these. There's hundreds of attorneys in the city attorney's office who do all of that work. Right. Yeah. And she, so she will be involved in setting policy for the division. Right. But she's not going to be, prosecuting all these cases herself.
Fair. Okay.
Right? So, if there is change, it will take time. And certainly the city council has ideas about, looking at whether they can mandate pre-filing diversion programs and other things to try to push back on any effort by Davison to, to lessen the city attorney's office support for a lot of the programs that have been in place for quite a while now.
Right. That's going to be an interesting tension between the city council and the city attorney's office over the next couple of years with Ann Davison at the helm. So, I know we're going to keep on talking about election stuff here, Kevin, and we could go on like this for an hour, but I do want to make sure that we cover a lot of other things that are happening at the city level, especially what's happening with the budget. Time for public hearing number 2 for the Seattle City Council's budget process. Keep it right here for our next segment. Now hear this. All right, it is city budget time here, and coming up this week on the 10th, the second public hearing from the Seattle City Council on its $7 billion budget package. The Budget Committee Chair, Teresa Mosqueda, will present her balancing package on that date of the 10th. Then discussions within the council about that will be starting up right after that. And on the 12th, we'll hear a lot about that as well. Then the council really won't be coming up for air until about a week after that. Here's the breakdown from Councilmember Mosqueda.
That means the next opportunity for the council's deliberation on the draft budget package will be November 18th and November 19th, where we will have the chance to hear possible amendments, and we will have the opportunity to have another public hearing on November 18th.
Kevin, this week right here, it seems like this is the time when the sausage gets made on the budget. Long days, long nights. I know a lot of staffers are working weekends too. The intensity of this, I think, really gets ratcheted up in mid-November. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now they're finally making decisions. They've been talking for a very long time. Yeah. Now they actually have to make decisions. So the budget chair, Councilmember Mosqueda, is going to put together a balancing package of what she believes are a set of amendments to the budget that still keep it balanced, but include more spending, potentially some cuts to things that have the consensus support of the city council members, right? So that when they finally get to voting, this will be kind of a non-controversial part, right? That they can just kind of vote that on through and then focus on the potential amendments where there is a difference of opinion between them, right? So what we're going to see this week is we're going to see the balancing package on the 10th. There's going to be a public discussion, as you mentioned, right after the public hearing. There's going to be a couple of days of discussion of, if they take that long, of the balancing package. Yeah. And the city council members are going to do one last round of amendments. And then the following week, they are going to vote on the balancing package, and they're going to vote on any of those last minute amendments. Right. And then they're basically done with the budget.
Right. And they're looking for that final vote on the 23rd of November. I know we've talked about this in past weeks, Kevin. There didn't seem like there was a lot that would turn into huge hurdles for the Seattle City Council. But you noted in Seattle City Council Insight, there are a couple of controversial pieces here when it comes to different things that the council wants to fund. And I wanted to touch on some of those pain points, I guess, for the council and what they're going to be looking at here and those discussions, what those are going to look like.
Yeah, they have several really big asks. Some come from the Regional Homeless Authority. They want to spend $19.4 million on a new 150-bed high acuity shelter basically crisis shelter downtown.
Right.
Another, $6 million on Navigator program, a peer Navigator program. They got about $600K more administrative expenses they want to do. So that's a big chunk of money. They really want to spend a lot more on mental health services in Seattle, which is controversial on its own because that's supposed to be the responsibility of the King County and of the state.
They're supposed to be doing the outreach. Yeah.
No, they're supposed to be actually provisioning mental health services. So if somebody needs services, are there providers that they can go to for that?
Got it. Okay.
And, we've seen all the issues with the state around, Western State Hospital and other mental health services.
Yeah.
The county has been supposed to, expand and build out and provision these services over the last several years, and they've really dropped the ball on that.
Yeah.
So now it seems like the city council wants to go it alone and do it themselves. But one certainly has to ask, if the county and the state haven't been successful at this, why do we think the city is going to be any good at this?
I don't know.
It is hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to find the staff. It's hard to find the facilities. There's an enormous amount of regulation. It's just hard to run well. Right?
It speaks, I think, a little bit to the pressure that has been put on the council by downtown businesses. They talked a lot about that. The DSA, I know, wrote a letter to the council talking specifically about that behavioral health investment. So I feel like that's a little piece of the puzzle here when it comes to why the council is considering that.
Yeah, but it fits into a larger pattern for the city council where right now they want to micromanage a lot of things.
Yeah,
because, you mentioned the regional housing authority, regional homeless authority earlier, and which is supposed to be the organization that takes a broader regional view of what homeless investments we should be making. But the city council, who's micromanaged the city's investments and earmarks for specific providers for years, is not letting up, right? They are still micromanaging all this investment. So they can end up trying to write a service agreement with the Regional Homeless Authority that says, no, you have to give this much amount of money to this organization, this amount for this organization, and really kind of spill out. So why do we have the Regional Homeless Authority? Right? If the city is still going to be micromanaging all this at the level, at what point do we actually get around to a regional plan for this?
Right. And also, you brought it up last week, and I've actually just spoken with Councilmember Andrew Lewis, who's the committee chair for homelessness, and a member of the Lived Experience Committee on the RHA about this, the Regional Homelessness Authority. I think there's some tension over tiny houses, Kevin. And I don't know how that's going to play out, but I think that's going to be an very interesting interplay here. When you talk about micromanaging, I think the city council says these have been successful. We need at least some of these on the table. And I wonder how that moves ahead.
Yeah, and will the city end up running themselves? Nominally, right now, the responsibility for those is supposed to switch over to the Regional Homeless Authority from January 1st.
Right.
But the Regional Homeless Authority CEO, Mark Donis, is not particularly excited about these. And he and the Lived Experience Coalition on the governing board are saying basically the same message, which is, we have to be really careful because this could turn into like a slippery slope if we decide that, this is housing.
Right.
It's not an emergency shelter. These tiny homes are long-term housing for people. We're basically, they're not tiny home. The Lived Experience Coalition has said these aren't homes. These are sheds.
Yes. Right.
We're shedding people basically.
Yeah. Right.
And so we need to be very careful about embracing this too strongly because this really isn't a solution for housing for folks.
Yeah, certainly
but it's
not
super easy and seductive to start thinking about it.
In that way.
As a housing solution.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And we'll watch how that plays out. I wanted to talk about another budget piece that we've been discussing over the past several weeks here. This whole idea about salary savings from the SPD. This one's a little fraught too, and we're going to touch on what the mayor's talking about with this in a little bit. But help me out with this thought about salary savings for the SPD. I know the council is going to continue to say we're fully funding the SPD's budget requests or whatever else, and there's more to it than that. Help us break this down. Right.
So SPD has what's called a staffing plan that they do every year, which says we expect this many attrition, and we expect, given our pipeline through hiring and training, to be able to hire this many people.
Yeah.
And what the city council tries to say every year is, yes, we are fully funding their staffing plan.
Right.
And this, it's a little bit disingenuous because at the same time, they're also saying our long-term plan is to downsize this department. Right. So, when you announce to a department that your long-term plan is to downsize them, there's a very strong argument to be made that you are encouraging attrition. So you can say, yeah, we're fully staffing it, but they're also sort of encouraging attrition in the department as well, right? People, and you tell people you're going to downsize their department, they believe you. And they start writing up their resume, right? So there's that. At this point, given the high attrition that's happened over the last 18 months, it looks like compared to a year ago, there's about $19 million less needed for salary. To pay for salaries, right? So the big question is what to do with that $19 million. And we've talked about that before. SPD has proposed, a plan for about $18 million of that. The city council is skeptical of about $2.5 million of technology investments, and they're thinking that the staffing plan as a whole is, pretty aggressive. They think that attrition might be higher. They think that the hiring goal is a little aggressive. So they're thinking about maybe we should proviso another $5 million so that, it doesn't get spent on other things in the short term. And if we get towards the end of the year and it's not getting spent, we can pull it back and spend it on other things.
And
so that's a big part of the tension, the tug of war that's going on here. And I'm sure we're going to hear from Chief Diaz from SPD in the coming weeks, and once again saying the same thing he was saying
last year,
9 months ago, which is, look, I need some consistency in the budget. If you keep changing it under me, I can't plan and I can't make investments. So just tell me what the budget is, and then leave it that way.
And there's another actor, if you want to call it that, within this tug of war. The mayor talking about this specifically last week, issuing an emergency order providing $10,000 to $25,000 hiring bonuses to SPD officers and to 911 dispatchers at the Community Safety and Communication Center, the CSCC. What did you make of this action by the mayor?
I thought it was a fascinating move, I really thought there's a very good chance that the city council was going to react strongly and immediately jump in and say, and reject it, because they have the right to do that. They have not. Councilmember Sawantis said she plans to introduce legislation that would reject it. But after this week's election,
after those votes,
is the city council going to go for that? I don't know. And then following on that, she announced at the end of the week, the mayor announced at the end of the week that as far as the 911 dispatch part of this, almost overnight, the availability, the announcement of the availability of hiring bonuses
want to sign up,
increased the number of applications they got by almost tenfold for 911 dispatch positions. They didn't say anything about SPD officer positions, but it's a very different kind of hiring timeline and hiring sort of pipeline process for that versus 911 dispatchers. So she is already sort of claiming victory, like, hey, look, this
35
really,
people put in applications.
This
Here
really
we go.
works.
No,
so it may be that the city council comes back and tries to negotiate with the mayor and say, let's do this for 911 dispatch, because they clearly also have a staffing crisis going on. But we can't back doing this for SPD officers. But then again, the election this week throws a lot of this stuff up in the air,
into question, for sure.
And we're just going to have to see what the council ends up doing about this. I'm sure they're not happy. I'm sure they're not happy about Mayor Durkin doing this. But are they unhappy enough to actually want to do something about it?
Wow, that's the big question. We'll see what plays out with the council on that one. All right, so a story that Kevin and I have been covering for about 3 years here when it comes to mobile home parks. We're going to do this one, Kevin, and see how we go. Trying to preserve them within the city of Seattle. We're going to go mobile. Coming up on What's Next. Kevin, we've really been talking about this for 3 years. When you talk about delays and all that, I know the council goes through some stuff here, but these mobile home parks, they're finally trying to move on this to preserve them as affordable housing, and also try to make sure that if they are replaced in the future, that affordable housing goes in. Goes back to January of 2019. I wanted to talk about the history of this and where we're going with this.
It actually goes back earlier than that. It goes back to the MHA upzones. When these particular properties in the Bitter Lake, Holler Lake area were upzoned to neighborhood commercial.
There you go.
Right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then after that happened, the owner of the Halcyon Park, there are two parks here, the Halcyon Park and the Bella Bee.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The owner of the Halcyon Park tried to sell it to somebody who is going to
develop
basically redevelop it into a fairly large amount of housing.
Yep.
And would have to pay the MHA, fees and everything around that.
Right.
And the residents of the Halcyon Mobile Home Park were basically fearing for their futures, rightly so, because of the economics of how mobile home parks work.
Yeah.
And the city council sort of came to the rescue, and in January of 2009 passed a moratorium saying, okay, you can't redevelop these mobile home parks because they are a special kind of affordable housing for a set of folks on fixed incomes. And with the promise that they were going to write new legislation to kind of rezone these properties. Right. And that dragged out.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And then that dragged out. And so they've basically been renewing. They've renewed this moratorium 4 times. Now.
Right. Keep on kicking the can on this one.
So at the beginning of this year, they actually finally came up with a draft legislation for what a mobile home overlay zone would look like that would prevent these from being redeveloped. They would have to basically stay long term as mobile home parks. Right. And then the owner of the other park, the Bella Bee, filed a challenge to the SEPA determination of non-significance for that,
no impact,
which sent it to the hearing examiner, and which is it's a very lengthy process. So that basically derailed that for most of this year. In September of this year, the city and the owner of the Bella Bee actually settled it. They signed a settlement agreement in this, which says that the owners of these two properties, they're owned by different folks, can sell them to a nonprofit organization or a government, but only for the purpose of either maintaining them as mobile home parks or redeveloping them for entirely affordable housing.
Yes, right.
And so, if these owners don't want to continue, managing these mobile home parks, they have an option to sell it now.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a bunch of rules around that are in this agreement, rules and regulations about what that affordable housing needs to be like, and all this, zoning setbacks and all that stuff. So that's all in there. And now Councilmember Strauss has introduced legislation that would enact the mobile home park overlay district, following all the rules that were in that settle agreement. And the only catch is they're not going to get it passed through. It's going to pass through the city council, and the mayor's going to sign it, but it's not going to happen in time for before the expiration of the current moratorium. So they also just introduced one hopefully final extension to this moratorium through end of June of next year, so that they can get this through and pass in effect by January.
Oh boy, it's good to see. What I hope is the end of the road on this, and what I hope will be good for affordable housing for the city of Seattle, because we certainly need more of that. All right, well, it's time to wrap up our show. We always do that with a taste of something good to have during our coffee break podcast. And Kevin, you had talked about some pumpkin ice cream. I think I'm hearing it in the background there. Not a big product. I know, that's awesome. We love talking about the big stuff, I know, but I'm down with ice cream any time of the day. So how'd you do it? What's the secret that you have behind your recipe there?
So the basic recipe I use here is one from, it turns out there are lots of great ice cream recipe books. Molly Moon, the local ice cream store, has a really great one. But the one that I use for this one is one that I've had for a couple decades now. It's the Ben & Jerry's ice cream recipe book.
Interesting.
You can buy it at a bookstore. You can buy it, on Amazon.
Sure. Great
recipes. It gives you what they call a sweet cream base, 3 different sort of bases for ice cream, depending on how unhealthy you want it to be.
Yes, right.
And it's like mildly unhealthy to run to your doctor right now. Get the Roto-Rooter guy to go through your arteries.
Right.
But then there's all these different variations of flavorings on this. So awesome. This pumpkin recipe comes from the Ben & Jerry's book. It's just great. It's a great flavor for this time of year, obviously.
Totally. Yeah.
I wouldn't call it pumpkin spice, but there's some nutmeg in there too.
Okay. All right.
But pumpkin ice cream, it's a great dessert. and it's just fun. It's a neat flavor. It turns out pumpkin works really, really well
with ice cream. Okay,
as an ice cream flavor.
That sounds so awesome. And I like I'm saying, I would eat that for breakfast too. There's no judgment here. Sometimes you got to do that. Life is short. Eat dessert first. How about that? We'll wrap it up in that way.
Brian, you are so right.
Every now and then that happens. Well, thank you, Kevin, as always, for this. Thanks also to our patrons. Thanks to everybody who's listening. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Again, please become a patron on Patreon to support our show. Always appreciate that. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.